the friends of Therese and Faustina. The teaching of St. Therese can be summed up in one sentence: confidence in God's mercy. And that sentence is echoed perfectly in the phrase of Blessed Faustina, trust in Jesus. Therese wrote her autobiography, The Story of Her Soul, just 2 years before she died. It is regarded as the greatest religious bestseller of this century. It has already been translated into over 50 languages. Now I want to tell you a strange thing. She wrote it 2 years only before she died. And before she wrote it, there is only one reference in all her writings to the mercy of God. God's mercy hit Therese like a flash of lightning or a bolt of thunder. Before she wrote her story, 2 years before she died, Therese was like most of us here today. She gave God's mercy little more than notional assent. I cannot tell you at what moment in her life God's mercy became for Therese something real and vital and burning. But it was a moment of conversion in her life. There were many conversions in the life of St. Therese. But at that moment of conversion, Therese discovered a great truth, a truth to which she was prepared to surrender her whole life, utterly, completely, and entirely. God's mercy became the great passion of her life. On the first page of her life story, Therese reflects on her calling by God, and God's mercy opens up for us. She says, I am going to be doing only one thing. I shall begin to sing, but I am going to sing for all eternity the mercies of the Lord. Therese opens the Gospels, and her eyes fall on those lines of Mark's Gospel, and going up into the mountains, he called unto him those whom he chose. Therese will find that lesson again on the lips of Jesus. You did not choose me. No, it was I who chose you. This is the mystery of my calling, she says, my life. And indeed, it is the mystery of every Christian calling. God does not call those who are worthy, but those whom God wants to call. And this pattern of God's mercy is the same pattern in the life of Blessed Faustina. The pattern of God's mercy is always the same. God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the strong. St. Paul tells us God chose what is weak in the world to confound the strong. We are still only on the first page of her life story, and Therese opens up for us the whole plan of God's salvation with just one line from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. I have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I show pity on whom I please. In other words, the only thing that counts is not what human beings want or try to do, but the mercy of God. Now, Paul here is thinking of God's people, and he's wrestling with the problem of their faults, their failures, and their sins. God has rejected his people then, Paul asks. And he answers, of course not. Paul replies, then why did they fail? Because they relied on good deeds, Paul replies to his own question, instead of trusting in faith. All their failures, weaknesses, and sin, he explains, are in order that God might show mercy to them all. This is a fundamental truth of the teaching of St. Therese. Weakness and sin are not necessarily an obstacle. They are a claim on God's mercy. It's part of the plan of God's providence that we should succeed by failure. Like so many others, Therese was familiar with many of the great classics of the spiritual life, like the way of perfection. But this kind of perfectionist language seems to suggest that everything is possible by our own efforts. It isn't. We are weak and fragile and sinful. In the course of justice, none of us would see salvation. We need redemption, individually, collectively, as a church. Therese saw this more clearly than most of us. Therese discovered her way to God through failure, weakness, a humble and a contrite heart. Her way of confidence in God's merciful love is perfectly in harmony with the Gospels. This chapter on God's plan of salvation in the letter to the Romans seems to have been a special favorite of St. Therese. She returns to it again later at the end of her life, and she reflects on the words of Exodus which Paul quotes in his letter. It was for this that I raised you up, to use you as a means of showing my power and to make my name known throughout the world. We've all heard of Therese's burning love for the missions. I would want to preach the gospel on all 5 continents simultaneously, and even to the most remote islands. I would be a missioner, not for a few years only, but until the end of time. She had her spiritual brothers, missionaries who traveled as she herself longed to travel, to spread the glorious standard of the cross on the mission field. She supported them with her prayers. The zeal of a Carmelite, she once said, embraces the whole world. She would go to the missions herself, but bad health and death prevented her. Her life is a living commentary on the words of the gospel. Pray the Lord of the harvest. She shares the title of the principal patroness of the missions with St. Francis Xavier, but she never left her Carmelite convent. So much for her witness to the missionary value of a silent life of prayer and sacrifice. But all these missionary desires of Therese are now to be fulfilled. God has truly raised her up as an instrument of his power to make his name known throughout the whole world. After her death, she will be a channel, like Faustina, of God's power, a channel of his merciful love. Therese says, I feel that my mission is about to begin. My mission of making others love God as I have loved him. My mission of teaching my little way to souls, the way of trust and absolute surrender. Therese invites all of us to make with her the same discovery, the discovery of God's mercy that she herself made. She promises to help us. She opened her heart to receive what she calls the waves of infinite tenderness. Now she wishes to pour them out on the world. What pleases God most, she told her sister, is the blind trust I have in his mercy. This is my only treasure. She wants to share that treasure with all of us. Her message speaks to everyone, inviting us, as she put it herself in words addressed to God, to surrender with total confidence to your infinite mercy. The ways of the Almighty have not changed, she said, for he is always using his creatures as instruments to carry out his work in souls. Please to choose what is weak and effective as an instrument. That's how Therese and that's how Faustina see themselves today. God has called them to be a channel of his mercy for everyone, everywhere, even until the end of time. They both invite us on their voyage of discovery, the discovery that mercy will never end. Mercy is forever. The work of Therese, the work of Faustina are not complete. Even now, in a real sense, their mission is only beginning, always beginning, to teach the world, in the words of Therese, trust and absolute surrender to the mercy of God.